Thank you for tuning in to the World Builder's Anvil, episode 176. Science fiction universes to fantasy worlds.
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build.
Welcome back. As always, my name is Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And painfully yours, I am Michael Miller.
This is our first World Builders in bed. We are in bed delivering the show to you guys today.
By we, let's be clear. It is not we in bed. There's no we here. Michael is in bed, and we are literally recording this episode from my bedroom. It's the first time Jeff and I have both been at my apartment.
Studio South.
My home. Yeah, Studio South. I like it. If you've been paying attention on the Facebook group, you'd know that I have been in a lot of medical distress. So I literally am bedridden, and Jeff was kind enough to come down here and record here. So we've got a makeshift studio in my bedroom, and Jeff is nursemaid Jeff.
I'm nursemaid Jeff.
At my bedside, literally.
But if you saw my Facebook Live the same day that we recorded this episode...
That was cute, by the way.
Yes. If you've not yet had a chance to send your cheese sacrifices to Ra, hopefully they're not needed at this point.
I'll take I'm sure she will take the sacrifices, and I will absolutely take whatever good fortune those cheese sacrifices can afford me, because I am not in good shape right now. Yeah, the long and the short of it is I'm in a lot of pain because of a pinched nerve is the long and short of it, and I'm going in for something on Friday. So. And
I did drive over 800 miles to get to Michael's home today.
I think it was over 8 miles. Over 8 miles, Jeff.
I'm being dramatic.
I can tell.
I'm a fiction writer. I lie.
Yeah, I was going to remind you of that.
But just to set up an Xbox, and I'm like, hey, can we record an episode? And he's like, oh, Jesus. Okay, yeah, whatever.
Fine. I brought you down here to make me a sandwich, but, you know.
Get in the kitchen to make me a pie.
Yeah, and you haven't even made me the sandwich yet. So today we're talking about science fiction universes, but how the usage of that fiction and those lores can be applied to the creation of your fantasy worlds. Mm-hmm. So, and
the reason I kind of got inspired was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 it's either just come out.
I don't think it's out yet. Is it out?
I think it might have had its preview.
The trailer, definitely.
No, I think the preview came out last night.
Really? So definitely by the time
this is out, it's probably in the theater.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. By the time this episode launches, Guardians should be out.
Guardians is definitely going to be out by the time you hear this episode. But I was watching one of the trailers, and it got me thinking about science fiction stories, the ones that I love. All of the good ones, not the bad ones. And
because Jeff only loves the good ones.
I love the good stuff.
See, I love the bad stuff too. Like, I have such I have a lot of room in my heart for science fiction. Yeah,
actually, my wife would probably say I'm very liberal on what I love. She did not like Bubba Hotep or Brazil.
How could she not like Bubba Hotep? Oh, I love Bubba Hotep.
Bubba Hotep is the best.
This is a great movie.
That's the call to action for all the rest of the episodes.
I don't know if I would call that a science fiction, though.
Close enough.
I mean,
that JFK was science fiction.
But, I mean, you could also go, it's fantasy adventure. Like,
with science fiction elements, because JFK was a science fiction character in there.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So.
All right.
Let me get to the show flow here, because I'm actually not looking at it. I know you're very surprised by that.
I'm surprised. And I'm surprised he knew the topic today. And not just from his usual bravado, but from the loads of pain medication that he's on.
Yeah. It doesn't help a whole heck of a lot.
If he forgets he's recording, we're just going to keep going, and we'll put it all out there.
Yeah, that'll be funny. So you've got the Inspired by the Guardians, and also like other space shows. You want to talk a little bit about space shows before we get into world differences?
Yeah, and I think probably the best example, like classic science fiction that probably almost everyone knows, is like the old Star Trek. You go from world to world. There's very little there. There's like usually one culture, maybe a couple rooms even that you go into in, why they're visiting. Sometimes they come up to the ship even, and you don't even go down to the planet. They develop the cultures, and there's some depth into the culture, typically the dominant culture of the alien species.
What I also remember a lot of with Star Trek versions across the years is a lot of times they'll have episodes where it would be two cultures, and the reason the Federation is there is because they're ironing out a dispute between two cultures. So you've got a planet which, if you look at our planet, obviously there's tons and tons and tons of different cultures, but it's always like we can only really do two in one episode. So there's always like, this is the dominant one, and this is the one they're subjugating, and this is the conflict and what have you. So
really the thing that caught my attention was one of the issues that I always see fantasy world builders get caught into is they're trying to rebuild Earth. And I mean, trust me, look at Gardul. You could argue that I do the same thing. So I'm not a saint in this by any fashion. But the thing is, we always have to keep in mind the intention of what we're doing. And once again, going back to the idea of framing your world, and framing the reason why you're doing it. If you're telling a story, you might not need more than a town, or maybe a couple locations within a kingdom. You don't even typically need an entire kingdom for a story. So,
what I kind of like as an analogy? I kind of like the idea that when you're writing, you're set dressing. If you've ever... Jeff comes from a background of stage performance, but for those of you listening, if you haven't ever had the opportunity to work with stage performance or even film or television production, you have to get that everything's fake, and even some of the stuff that's real is still fake in a way.
Yeah.
So your book, your story, what you show the reader and what you share with the reader, it can be skin deep. You can know everything that's going on behind it, but you're sharing that with your reader and your listener, if it's depending on the format of your media. So you don't need to explain the bone density unless that's important to the story. You don't need to explain the muscle tissue unless that's important to the story. You just have to show them what they need to see, and you need to carry them through that with a sense of exploration and clarity and passion and realism, but you don't have to push it so far that you're just expending useless information for the sake of doing it. I think it's great that there's a lot of world builders out there that are so thorough, but at the same, because I don't know what I'm going to use in my world, so I need to make sure that my world is really fleshed out. But I think that you have to know where to draw the line. I like the idea of build the world as a skeleton, and then the story determines what I need to build next. And you already have the skeleton, so then you start putting in the muscle and the bone and the sinew.
And that's the reason why I always talk about the framework building, which is exactly what it says. It's a skeleton, right? So I have this outline of a whole bunch of ideas throughout my world, because I do have a full world that I develop in my world building, which you don't need, but I like. Because part of me is, and you have to distinguish some stuff to me as world building hobby versus world building for storytelling. Because it's like, I get very interested in stuff like weather patterns. I get very interested in stuff like geology, plate tectonics. And the thing to keep in mind is those things are great, but how are they ever going to be relevant in a story unless like there's a major plate tectonic going through the area you're in that's having a disturbance. And why it's there is unimportant, and probably won't even come through if it's unrealistic in a scope of a real world, that there shouldn't be a fault plate there. That's not going to come through the text of a story or the visuals of the story. And sort of backing up what Mike said, there was this great set I was in.
Michael.
Oh, yeah. Still catching that one.
So I take another pill, I might miss it.
We'll try again at the end of the episode, folks. I was doing a play called Arsenic and Old Lace, which is a really, really fun play. There's an old movie, too, with Cary Grant. I would suggest to go see it. The neat thing is the town I live in was where the actual incidents of the story took place in real life.
Really?
Yes, they took place in Windsor, near where that, when you're going 159 through the center, and it splits, and you can turn down Pequannock, or you go up past the center towards my house. Right near there was the incidents of those stories. And they placed it in New York for the play because no one would find the contents believable for a small town in Connecticut. But the beautiful thing of it was there was a big staircase that a guy did a great job on the set for. So when you're looking at it, it looks like it's the first and second floor of a bed and breakfast. And which is the set at which it takes place. But behind that set, because it was this gigantic, literally wooden wall that was built up on stage, sort of a framed out wall like you might have in your house, and it looked great from the audience. There was a nice railing and everything. Behind it, there were a couple scenes where people had a very short period of time to change their clothes in. It all got stored in the same, in the back of the staircase. So behind the staircase, behind the set, people could grab out clothes and swap out because they had to change very quickly for a set change. And they'd have a chance to go somewhere more private. And a lot of times in theater, you share undressing with many, many people.
Yeah, that's very common in the theater crowd. So you get really comfortable with a whole bunch of people not wearing a whole lot of clothing. Yep. That's why you find that the drama clubs are so close. Not necessarily in a high school setting, but in a college setting, certainly, and definitely professionally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's just one of those things to keep in mind. Once again, you're creating a facade for people, even if you're going over the scope of your world. In a story, think about the scenes, And so if you really get in the spot where you're struggling in a story or you're world building, because let's say you created a serial, like every month you're creating 1,000 words of text for like a microfiction and you're sharing that out on your website. And every month they're showing up into a different part of the world. You can actually do that. But the thing is, you need to create the locations and you need to know enough about the culture to deliver it, but it's you're interacting briefly with the culture. You just need to know what that real area looks like right around where the story is taking place. And maybe a few of the details to flesh it out, like the name of the local lord, if it's relevant, the name of the king, if it's relevant, the characters and stuff you need to know, but you don't really need to know all of the religious rituals unless they're important to the story. So you just need an outline of each area that you're going to and just the details needed for the story. So if you take a story first approach, will help break you through those areas where you get stuck world building. So, the thing is, and I do know some people do world build for hobby, and I do that too. But for me, I don't do that when it comes to my writing.
That's a huge distinction right there.
And I will add more detail to those areas later on, but I will not add in more detail during the story unless it's my bonus time. So unless I get around, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do some world building now. I might even go in the same spot and add more detail, but it's not relevant to getting the story out.
So getting back to science fiction, we've got some things to think about, like important details that you want to take into consideration, like how space works.
Yeah.
So what do you want to get into about that there? Because that's a bullet point.
Yeah. No, one of the neat things here is, and these are certain things that I think sci-fi does really well, and I say how space works because that's typically very relevant in most science fiction stories. How do you move through space? Can you go faster than the speed of light? How can you go faster than the speed of light? What does it mean that you have the ability to do that? Can you just travel anywhere in any direction? Or are there wormholes? How do you move in a gigantic space that is beyond the comprehension of any human, except for maybe like
Hawkins.
Hawkins, that's who I was trying to think of.
Did you see Passengers yet?
Passengers? No,
Okay, so Passengers was this pretty big sci-fi movie that just came out recently with two of the biggest stars right now with Guardians of the Galaxy.
The Star-Lord.
Yes, Chris Pratt. So Chris Pratt.
He has a different name?
Yes, his name is Chris Pratt. So Christopher Pratt and
how did I miss this?
And Jennifer Lawrence. It's
really?
Two of the biggest stars on the world.
And it's science fiction.
Now, and it's science fiction. It's called Passengers. And there's this isn't a spoiler, but there is. I'm going to share a detail, but it doesn't spoil really story or anything. The basic gist is that something goes wrong on a ship that's traveling from point A to point B. Well, point A to point B is like a 200-year journey. So everybody's in like stasis.
Okay, I remember seeing commercials for that.
Okay, you probably, yeah. So something goes wrong, and he wakes up, and he's trying to solve the problem. Because in addition to him waking up, there's also a problem with the ship, like that could compromise everything. So he's trying to like, well, what do I do? And he is a technical guy, so he's trying to send a message back. I believe from Earth. I don't know if they started on Earth or not, but I don't remember. So he's trying to send a message back so that he can, he records a video, he explains what happens, and then he hits send. And then the computer spits out the reality of the circumstance. They're like, okay, it's going to take them 8 years to get this message. And because you will have traveled so far away, it's going to take another 36 for the response to get to you. So, hey, guys, I have a question. And literally like 40 years later, he'll get an answer. So, like, what a scary reality of the way that space works. So for me, when you're working with a space, and obviously we're generally working with fantasy fiction, but when you're working with science fiction, the two biggest things for me is, can they communicate from point A to point B in space by some means that is right now not possible? That alone changes, and this, I can bring it right into fantasy, and this we've talked about before, ties right back in. Communication is huge. So in a sci-fi setting where you're talking about being across different planets or in different galaxies, the ability to communicate from galaxy to galaxy would be astounding. Okay, so bring that into a smaller scale, pull that into your fantasy world. We've talked about this before, where we said that communication is one of the most key things about expansion and the sharing of technologies, such as farm irrigation or just farm crop rotation, little things like this that wasn't known. And at a low-tech level isn't known. If the people, 20 miles away know it, but they don't share it because the communication sucks, then their culture is going to advance and this other culture won't. If communication for some reason, some way, a bunch of local cultures have like some sort of post, whether it's a postmaster or some sort of post office service where they're just traveling with communication, that completely changes the world. It literally changes the world.
Well,
and in addition to communication, the other big thing is transportation. So with the space thing, can I travel from point A to point B, and am I only limited to impulse power, whatever power we can generate now, or is there the ability to take advantage of wormholes? And again, getting back to fantasy, it's exactly the same paradigm. You bring it right back down to, well, these people can only carry their stuff from point A to point B, and they throw it on horses. Yeah, well, these people, 40 miles away invented the wheel. So they're building tons of stuff and moving wagons around because they invented the wheel.
And those were the two main points I want to get to with this, where I don't think a lot of times we think about it because we think about transportation and the movement of ideas in the context of today. And this is definitely not an accusation on all science fiction writers, but there's less thought on stuff like that. Like the king happens to know when the rebellion pops up. That would be a huge issue in an ancient society.
Yeah. How did he find this out? If you've got a let's say it's a small kingdom. Let's say you've got a kingdom that's like 2,000 people, right? It's kind of remote. And you've got 20, 30 people that are really noticing that things need to change, and they start to organize. Well, you only have a small club there, and they know that their ideas are dangerous, so they keep it to themselves. And maybe they rally to the point where they've got 100, maybe 200 people. That's a lot for a population of 2,000. And if the king finds out there is literally 100 people that are actively against the crown, stuff's going to go down. And how does he find that out?
And literally,
it's not like, there's a rebellion, everyone's talking.
How long does it take for him to find out? Like, the Incans had a wonderful system set up because they did not have the wheel, but they had great roads. And actually, I do really want to, at some time, go explore the Incan roads. They don't. To this day, we're not sure how big they are because some of them do go on the other side of the Andes and into the Amazon, so we're not really sure how big the road system was.
Have you been to the ones in Mexico? Because didn't you go? You didn't go to the temples in Mexico, like fly.
Not to Mexico. I was down in the Belize side, but once again, it's all surrounded by rainforest, so you only see what's excavated.
Yeah, there is a road that I got to go on, and it is absolutely amazing. It's like straight as an arrow. And you can see it at night because, and I know we talked about this before, because they were smart enough to crush up. It's all like crushed rock, and it's still there, and it's not like, it's almost like a pseudo concrete. They definitely did something. Oh, stand by. That's an alarm, people. I apologize for the interruption. That means I can take the other medication.
That's the yay!
Yeah, but actually, I took it a little while ago, so that alarm was just an interruption. So it's a pseudo concrete that they used, and they were genius enough to realize, because one of their biggest resources is the ocean. Well, they smashed up seashells. They used tons and tons, literally, of seashells.
Those are great roads.
Yeah, and they smashed them up. And so, of course, super hard, one. And two, it reflects the moonlight really well. So you at night, you can see it, which is, that's unbelievable. We don't do that now.
No. And think about it, we put little reflectors on the side of the road. We have our own little mechanisms.
But we have light. We have lighting. We have headlights and we have streetlights. But wouldn't it be great if the road was a little lighter? I realize that in the daytime it makes it for dangerous because back in the Incan times they weren't exactly driving 80 miles an hour down the road, so they didn't have to worry about the danger of reflection. But these days we do.
But we still have the same considerations now where we put lights in more densely populated areas along roads. When you get further out, you have your headlights, and maybe you go a little bit slower if it's really, really dark that night.
I do.
But the thing is, but once again, it's like along the roads, what they would have are these little way stations, and I want to say that they were a mile apart. So from every part of the Incan Empire, every mile along the roads would be like a little way station. And so what would happen is
not literally.
Literally a way station.
To weigh what they were going, or to wait to hang out.
Yes.
Okay.
And the king's messengers would be in these way stations. And so if something happened at a town on the beach across the empire, someone would take a message and start running it back. He would get to the next station, hand it off, and they would relay it all the way up. And I forget the time period, but the Incan Empire was spread north to south along a large swath of South America. I think within a week, the king could get a message from any part of his empire.
That's amazing.
And this is the same way that tax records would be sent back to the king. This is how he would stay informed on the
taxes like that. They were that organized.
Oh yes, they actually had this knot roping language system.
You told me about this.
Yeah. And we're not going to really go into that one right now, but we'll probably cover that again because I find that one fascinating.
Oh my God,
it's a different writing system that is completely alien. But the thing is, do you think about this and when and how people learn about things? Because news does travel. And the thing is, if you have magic and stuff like that that keeps communication up, right? Why would cultures evolve as fast? Because usually what happens is, like, there's this vast culture on Earth. We call it a proto-culture called the Indo-Europeans. And as the name indicates, there's a large swath of people in the world that are Indo-Europeans. People from India all the way to Europe. And I think about 75% of the active languages are Indo-European. It's like if you go to ancient Sanskrit, was almost exactly the same as Latin and Greek.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that. I thought it was
in structures and stuff like that. Think of how many thunder gods there are from India to Scandinavia. The use of the chariot in warfare, that was an Indo-European invention. And so the interesting thing is, if you live in a world where magic, is used for communication, once the people start spreading out over a generation, they start losing track of the people they broke up with. So where there's a lot of the root symbolism is similar in the culture. If you looked at Hindu culture today and looked at like Norwegian culture today, you might not see that they're related, besides the linguistic connections. But they are. But my theory would be, in a world where...
Second interruption. Sorry, guys. That was my cell phone.
My phone's not going off today.
Well, I need to be in communication today, so I'm sorry.
So, in the larger scope of things, my theory would be, in that scenario, the Indo-Europeans would remain a much more consistent culture because they would not lose communication and they would get feedback and stories of the events that are molding the culture in different parts that they've settled in. So you'd have much larger cultural groups, much fewer cultural groups over time. But, the thing is, remember to keep space in mind, and of course we're shrinking it down, but you still have the same problems. It goes back to our Excalibur discussion the other time where the guy's like, the world's not 20 miles long.
The world's that big?
Yeah, well, it is. But, when you can't travel that far in your lifetime and you know no one who has, how big is the world and does it matter? The next thing that I think science fiction people, and they're required to do this, fantasy people aren't, but it's what's the technology of the world like? I'm big on this because it's like, how do you get those blocks into place? Do you always rely on magic? And if you do, if magic's that relevant for construction, how common is it throughout the rest of the world? Why would it not necessarily be more common? You need technology. And I think if as fantasy writers would think more about the low technology of things, and even if it doesn't have to be perfect, but look to theories of how, like academics think that ancient people solved problems because they were very inventive to get things done. And some of it was just they had manpower hours, like in Egypt where the river would flood and the farmers would have nothing to do, so they could go over and do giant public works projects thousands of years ago and build giant pyramids that are really impressive today.
I feel like this reminds me of something, getting back to like how the technology evolves, especially low-level technology. It's something that fascinates me, but from an aspect of world building and or story creation, simple things like, the people in this area of the world make these thatched roofs, right? Mm-hmm. And they then go from thatched roofs to like hard shell covered like wooden roofs.
Yeah.
Well, you got to realize that you can't just say they developed the board one day. Like there is a lot of technological advancement when it goes from, I have thatched a roof. I've effectively created a roof by the same skills and tools applicable that I could use to make a basket. Yeah. And I've just made a gigantic basket that keeps the rain off of me at night. But when you start talking about going to a hard roof, you have to cut lumber. You have to shape wood. You have to have all kinds of steel woodworking tools to accomplish such a task. So you're not talking about, we've come up with a smarter way to build the house. You're talking about, we have done, metallurgy. We have created all these different tools, and because of all that has allowed me to make this kind of roof. Now, some people are not going to care, and a lot of people reading a book, they're not going to get into that. And I'm not suggesting that everyone should get into that detail. I mean, we actually generally advocate the exact opposite. But my point is that it should be considered. If your construction methods are of a given way, you have to understand, well, what did it take to make that?
What are the tools needed?
Yeah. Is my culture, is my world advanced enough, developed enough that they could justify having such a structure? Because otherwise you could say, okay, well, if they have that kind of structure, then they have this and they have this and they have this. Well, if they have all those things, then why don't they have, like, if they have wood, if they have sawmills, like if they're at a point where they have sawmills, they should have better steel weapons.
Yeah.
Like if they can develop the appropriate tools to process lumber, then they can develop the tools necessary to kill people.
I'll put it to you this way. most of the agrarian civilizations, what we think of as the really early civilizations on Earth, all developed near rivers, and it was more than just the water for the food. It was the mud. Because mud is really easy to shape. Making mud bricks is really simple. You can start building structures very quickly with mud. Much more quickly than with stone. Much more quickly than with wood.
It's lighter weight, easier to move.
Yeah, you can make nice small ones. And some even make bigger bricks too. But the thing is, you don't need a lot of specialized detailed tools to do that. But the other thing you have to realize too is...
Like the concept of a brick, literally a brick, is a technological advancement.
Yes.
Somebody one day...
Figured that out. Yep.
Someone one day created a jig that if they put all the mud in and let it dry, it would make a brick, and every time the brick would be the same size and shape.
Yep.
That is a technological advancement.
I think about it too. Some people were very clever, like the Chinese. Very early were like, wait, we can do that with metal. And so they started very early manufacturing metal bits like arrowheads and stuff like that. Where in the West, it took them a long time to figure out that, hey, if we use molds to make our arrowheads,
molds,
we could do a lot more. And they use molds for some things, but not for others. And it's funny. It's like each of those are advancements. And it's not necessarily that you need to know them all. But the thing is, if you're in a quarry in your story and it's relevant to see people working, what are the tools they're using? Those add the details. The details of a story are the things people remember. And don't flesh it all out for them, but give them small things that let them know that it's not today, and it's not here. Those are the details people need to really embrace the fantasy of it. How people live, I think this is one humans struggle with in general. People I know who've spent their entire life, especially in a very small geographical area in the United States, typically the ones I've met have very little understanding of how the world works. And that's not necessarily an insult on them, but they don't have any, our brains, our cognition uses adjustments. So this anchor point of this is what reality is, which is my life. And then I can put anchor from the anchor, I can grab out, and that's my area of understanding. And the funny thing is, cognitionally speaking, there's no logic involved with where the upper and lower limits of your estimations come from. It's just kind of that they're there, and they can be affected through many different things. So people who typically have less experience with seeing other cultures, especially in areas of the world that are a lot poorer than ours, really don't understand. And it's not an insult against them. It's just, that's just the way the human brain works, and it can understand it's different, but it just doesn't understand what it could really be like, because you never experienced it. And some people are better than others, but this is an assault on people or whatever. But I mean,
to put it in an extreme, just for the sake of ease of understanding, if you go out to the rainforest, you find a tribe that has never been exposed to the world, they're going to have absolutely no concept of an airplane.
Yeah.
But the more minute but very true statement of what you're getting to is like if you take a rural kid from the heartland of America who's just been raised in a corn town, and that's all he's ever known, he's going to be overwhelmed if you take him to New York City. Of course, he's familiar with New York City. He knows that it exists. He's seen it on television. But to take him there and show him how people live there and the different culture shock differences that you have to deal with living in a big city, it's a totally different environment. And he just would not have a basis of comparison, an idea to generate that understanding on his own. Not without going there, not without seeing it.
And I can actually verify that from my own experience. I grew up in Indiana. And I didn't grow up in really rural spots, but I had visited them. I had family who lived in those kind of spots. I lived in a small city in the Midwest. And when my whole perception of what the East Coast was, and I was a very curious person, and I love geography. I studied it all the time. But when I came out, especially like Connecticut, was nothing the way I expected it to be.
What brought you to Connecticut?
My dad got transferred.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in high school at the time, and but it was like it really shocked me how slow Connecticut was.
Does Did your dad work in insurance? Is that what brought him up here?
No, he worked for Command in Bloomfield.
Okay.
And it's just their corporate headquarters right here.
Okay.
Yep. And
so you were surprised by how slow Connecticut is?
Connecticut's exceptionally slow.
What do you mean by slow?
Well, when I moved out here in the mid 80s, everything in the town of Windsor closed at 5 o'clock.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah. And it's a little better today. Actually, vastly better today in many ways. But it's still like when I was a kid, there were 24-hour department stores. They all were. And you know, they were starting to come out with a 24-hour full department store, full grocery stores. Then I came out here and the grocery stores were the size of a bodega in comparison,
right,
from a grocery store in Connecticut to an actual bodega in New York.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, so it was like, finding stuff was a lot more difficult. And you can see why people were in a rush out on the East Coast because everything closed.
Yeah, you get out of work, you got to get to where you...
That's right. You got to get, especially back then. It's like I said, a little better today, but like when I was a kid, bank drive-thrus were open 24 hours a day. 24 hours a day. You could go to the drive-thru, set up an account at a bank at 2 a.m. in the morning.
That's wild.
Yeah, and like, you still can't do that out there.
I was going to say, I can't do that now.
But luckily with the WeberNets, you can.
With the WeberNets, yeah, I do everything on the WeberNet.
But, you know, But
thank you, Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. He did invent the WeberNets.
Yes, he's a very helpful guy, smart dude.
You know, the thing to keep in mind is, you know, people lived much simpler lives, and when we fictionalize stuff, we exaggerate it. We have to. You know, it's like the funny thing is if you talk to people who have past lives, like 90% of them were knights or aristocrats or kings. And about 95% of the world were farmers.
Yeah, no one says I was a farmer.
Yeah.
I was Cleopatra.
Yeah, you know, so
King
it's
of
like
Scotland.
Where that stuff might exist, but so it's not questioning that so much, but it's the fact that statistically, the number of people who admit to having past lives and what they are don't match up with the reality of the way the world was.
Well, you understand why that is the way it is, don't you? We've talked about the numbers of like how many people have lived on the planet, and it's staggering how many people have been born and died. Well, they only recycle the souls that are exceptional. So the Cleopatras and the kings of Scotland.
Probably like 450 of those right now.
Right. Yeah. So those people get recycled. But the peasants, they just go right to the afterlife because there's no reason to use them again. So
well, they've earned it because their life sucked.
Yeah, exactly. So if you should talk to somebody with past life experience, it's going to be grand because they have it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made it past the vetting process. They in the reincarnation avenue of existence. They would be like, no, not this one. No, Johnny Farmer guy, you're done.
You're done.
You're done.
You've earned this right.
Yes, you were not exceptional enough to go back and share more of yourself with the world. You were too bland, so...
That's very philosophically Greek about you.
But I created the brick mold. I'm the one who created the brick mold.
I created civilization.
Without me, there'd be no bricks in South America. At least not for another 50,000 years. Maybe 2,000 years.
But the thing to realize, though, is like on Earth, you know, this idea of an agrarian civilization was the first civilizations like 5,000 years ago. And really up until like the 1600s, everything that existed was a farm-based society. And it's really only at that point where there were some urban civilizations, and all civilizations form around cities. The majority of the work, the majority of the manpower is all on the farm. And most people live simple lives, slow lives, because all they're doing is farming. And like really, you go back to like the Iron Age, if people had 2 chairs in their home, they were rich. Your average person, the Lord would probably come around and steal them because he would need them to help pay for his next war. So,
are chairs currency in your world?
Chairs are well, it would be like a gold pound.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a bunch of people walking around with chairs.
That's right.
They just put, do you have your chair bag? He's robbed my chair bag. Some pickpocket running down the street with a big stack full of chairs.
But you know the thing.
Damn these lazy boys! So hard to pickpocket.
the thing to keep in mind is for most people, we're looking to fill in the details of the things in people's homes. And the thing is, if you're doing medieval or ancient, cultures, they're going to be very sparse, even for lords. The carpet was quite an innovation in a castle. And that was imported into Europe. So, and it was because they were so expensive that they went on the walls. So,
it's a tapestry.
It's a tapestry. That's right. It's not a carpet. It's a tapestry.
It's a tapestry. It's a carpet on the floor. It's a tapestry on the wall.
But, things...
They're so rich, they walk on the
tapestries. The details that we look for, if we're looking to create a naturalistic style world, are not, the chairs, the countertops, the way the kitchen looks in the medieval peasant's hut. It's... The details are about the village. What is the general architecture? It's about the tools they're using to do the work. Those are the stories that are really realistic if you're looking at it from a naturalistic standpoint. So the details to get caught up on are those little things in everyday life that are needed, because most people didn't have enough extra to have extra.
I do feel like we create a little bit of contradiction with that, because both of us appreciate,
of course,
that the importance, and from a naturalistic perspective of world building, you need it. Like, if you're going naturalistic, you can't be like, well, we have steel molding, but we still can't do X thing, or like we don't have this. Like, we have cotton gins, but we can't do this. You know what I mean? It's like you just can't justify it. Like, certainly, even in our world, there are plenty of spots throughout history where we had one form of technology that should have justified the existence of another, but it wasn't there, where there was an offhanded balance.
I think in general that's wrong.
But you do?
Yes, because in general,
I'm not saying it was commonplace. I'm not saying it happened a lot, but I'm saying there were times where you might have had.
There were a lot of times, like I said, the steam engine was created in ancient Egypt. So, I mean, there's a lot of times where there are things that we don't understand. But the thing is, research a little bit. You'll probably find examples. And if you can't, try and logically game one out of how using simple tools you can get there. But that's how you keep it naturalistic. If you're not worried about being naturalistic, don't worry so much about stuff like that.
My overall point, I wanted to complete it. I know I was kind of cutting me off there, was... So, like, we both of us like the naturalistic, but from a story creation standpoint, I feel that we also really stress the whole framework and just show, like, don't hamper the story and hinder your content generation by needing to naturalize everything.
Yeah, no, don't. But, I mean, and the thing is, if you want to do it, go to that level afterwards, but... Where I'm saying, like, when you need to get into the tools, when you need to get into the house, it's when there's story relevant. The thing is, if you never go into a peasant's house, which a lot of stories for fantasy never do, it's not important what goes in their house.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And to be honest, if you do, you're really not going to put a lot of stuff there anyway. There's going to be a fire pit.
Yeah.
Yes. There's probably not even a great way for it to get out, the smoke. So the thing is, don't
would they have some
stress
place,
the details at all that don't matter.
If you're talking like, just like TP hut sort of style living, like the farmer, the goat herder in our little campaign there, would he have had something inside the hut where he would go to the bathroom? So no.
But
that's what I was gonna say. Do they
usually it's pits?
Okay, so they just go out to a pit and pee or poo.
Yeah.
Okay.
And poo they would probably want to keep in a farming scenario. But yeah, I don't know if they would worry about where the pee goes so much, but the poo you actually want to keep because that actually
it's valuable.
It's valuable. Most like medieval, up until relatively recently when we started digging holes in the ground and putting little wooden houses over them, that was the next evolution from that, where it was a pit in the ground.
It's not a big advancement there.
Not usually really close, and definitely downwind. But the wind's changed course today. But a lot of times too, it's like in a lot of like ancient huts, urine was a lot of times mixed with local materials to help
solidify
it. And I don't know enough about how. I just know that urine was used a lot in hut building. Yay. But
okay. Well, what's your hut made of? Piss and poo.
Yeah. The things not to get stressed out about are like the desks, the furnishings, because they're usually going to be very, very sparse. And that's not to say you can't cheat and go there and people will probably buy it. They might. I like naturalistic worlds, so I'm just telling you the way I go, the way Jeffrey.
Like even like something that I think about, it's like if you walk into a given fantasy dwelling and there's a shelving unit, shelves. They have shelves. They have the technology for shelves. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like that is a technology.
Yeah.
Not everyone knows how to build a shelf. Do they have the tools? Can they structure wood that way? Can they anchor things? Like that's huge. Like as someone who has been working in the field of construction for the decades that I have, and you learn, I mean, New England is an old area of the country, so you see old construction methods, and you see, like, there was this, I forget what it was. It was a friend of mine had worked in this place where it was a historical building, and I want to say it might have been something part of like the Shakers, and they needed to rewire something, but they had some kind of variance. Now, variance, if you're not familiar with the word, is a legal term for when to get a building variance, you're basically asking the town if they will allow you to do something that is not quite to the building code or the electrical code, and there's always a reason, like maybe there's a physical obstruction so you can't quite do something a certain way, so you get a variance or what have you. But they would only they needed to drill through certain areas of the beams to install this wiring. So they said, okay, well, the place was rewired in like, I don't know, or wire added. The building's old enough that when it was built, there was no wiring. But they put wiring in like, say, 60 years ago. And they said, okay, we will allow you to change this circuit or add this light or do this thing, but it has to be done circa 1963. And when they did it, they're like, because of the nature of the structure and the culture that houses the structure, they would not allow power tools. So they needed to use hand drills for every hole to pass this wire through from point A to point B. Not only that, they needed to it's not like they could take a more modern version. They had to take the old tools.
And one more thing, just sort of from my science fiction frenzy of thinking, is really, they do a great job in science fiction, and they're forced to sort of benchmark life from Earth, and bring up story sequences that sort of illustrate what life in space would be like, or life on planets with low gravity, or Interstellar's a great one because they hit a whole bunch of crazy different environments.
You know that crazy bit at the end of the movie where he's all like
in the library?
Stuff?
Yeah.
You know that was all practical.
Oh, spoiler alert.
No, it's not a spoiler. Like, the effects for that, it looks like it's crazy, super computer generated. It's practical. They built that image physically.
Wow.
Like, you got to see like some of the perspective. Like, did a lot of cool.
Oh, it was amazing.
It's unbelievable. That is all physical.
Wow.
Which is one of the reasons it looks so interesting and real, because it's real.
It's real because it's real.
Yeah, it's real because it's real, but it's fake because it's not real.
Because it's theoretical. So it might not be fake.
Well, no.
But it probably
it's actually real. Faking theoretical.
Faking real.
Faking real, yeah.
Or something. We don't
Something like that.
But, and that's one thing to try and keep in mind is, a lot of times people are like, well, in my story, I don't have a way to do that. If there's something to illustrate when you're creating a story, it's about the scenes you create. It's about the characters you have. If there's something where you really want to distinguish the planet you're on from Earth or bring it towards Earth-like, you can create scenes in which things happen that allow you to do that. Because that's the story.
Yeah.
The story is the way you're delivering it. So,
like, instead of this is how gravity works, and there's a weird aspect of how physics occurs on my planet. Instead of just telling people that, create an example where it's displayed as part of your story, as part of the journey you're going to take us on. Just put it in there, like make a little short event that displays it. Show us. Don't
use
tell
stories.
us.
Don't do history dumps in your first 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 chapters. That used to work, and it's not so successful anymore.
Yeah, and you know what? I find that once you get the reader's benefit of the doubt, and you're going to get that by, like, say, book 2, you can get away with a little bit of that, but you really got to build trust first.
Yeah, and my thing is, in today's life, you need to give away stuff for free to help encourage people to buy what you're doing. And one of the things I'm thinking about with my first novel is putting together sort of this place that you can sign up for if you want to, because I don't want it publicly facing, because I don't want it to be spoiled out for other people. But, where I'll kind of go through it, I'll do a commentary for chapters, and I'll have world stuff in there that will drill into some more detail that I didn't go into, because some people are interested. Exactly. Yeah. The things that people who care about that stuff can go get it. But if it's not relevant, it won't show up in the stories at all. But it's a great way to give away something for free to help encourage people who are on the fence who go, oh, I like that kind of behind the scenes stuff. Why do you think they attach it to, like, Lord of the Rings put in the other disc? There's a reason why the other disc comes with those DVDs. And that's because people do like that kind of stuff. So.
I like that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And now for the real world builders task of the day.
The real world builders. I said the fake world builders task of the day is just to delete all of your writing files. Just delete them all right off your computer. Format the hard drive. That's your fake world builders. No,
you're fake news.
No,
you're
that's
fake.
News.
That's
sorry.
It's fake news.
Never mind.
Okay.
So what's
the real world builders task. It's like, once again, if you've done this before, take the day off. Take a nap. But, it's outline the world you need, but really think about specifically, what do you need? I need a house here. I need a castle here. I need a woods here. I need this here.
I need a dungeon over here.
Exactly.
I need a bad guy's evil lair.
Trace out the story and pick out just the things you need.
Yeah, build those things first.
And then create a framework around it to hold it together. And if you want to add some more detail on there, that's great to do. And you can always leak some of that into the story. But
the bad guy's lair, you need to know, because the good guy's going to be sneaking around that lair to rescue the damsel. But outside the lair, you're not going to tell anything in that story. So it could all just be scaffolding until you're ready to have him travel through that part of the world.
You've just spoiled their own story for them. The story they're writing, they didn't even know.
It's all scaffolding.
Yeah. Okay.
Which opens the possibility of scaffolding fights. So if you're writing a kung fu fantasy.
And then send it to Seize the GM. Okay. Now, for the real world task of the day, I want you, this is a quick one.
This is a good one. This is a real good one.
Go watch Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2, Firefly, Expanse, Cowboy Bebop, all of the Star Wars and all of the Star Trek ever created for next week.
And don't forget to get old Battlestar Galactica, new Battlestar Galactica.
And kind of watch episode to episode sometimes. Yeah.
Is there any other real smart ones that they should have?
There are so many. Interstellar we talked about, so you have to watch that, obviously. Yeah. But just find all of the good science fiction and watch it.
Yeah, watch all of it for next week, because there'll be a test.
Yeah, there will be a test next week, so we'll see you next week. And if you go to the show notes, as a bonus, I'll throw in one of the trailers that I like from Guardians of the Galaxy 2, even though by the time you see this, it will be over.
And if you haven't gotten onto the Undercroft, if you haven't gone to the Facebook page where we celebrate you as a community, come join us and hang out, because there's a lot of fun going on there.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good people who pretty much really run the community, and then Mike and I just kind of hang out with them.
Yeah.
And it's facebook.com/groups/Undercroft. And Mike would tell you that, and but the drugs are preventing him from saying it.
Yeah, but Michael's here to correct it. So,
all right, we'll see you next time, folks.
Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil. We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends, and so would they. If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting by showing them Stitcher or iTunes, or, best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.